The small town of Baden, nestled at the edge of the Black Forest, was known for its pristine landscapes, ancient spas, and quaint architecture. Tourists flocked there every year to bask in its old-world charm, unaware of the whispers exchanged among locals in hushed tones. Baden, the outsiders said, was a paradise untouched by time. But the locals knew better. Everyone in Baden had heard the tales of Der Verlorene Keller, or the Lost Cellar. Supposedly hidden beneath one of the town's centuries-old buildings, the cellar was said to contain the remnants of forbidden experiments conducted during the 1800s by a reclusive alchemist named Friedrich Baumer. Most residents dismissed it as a ghost story meant to spook children, but others, those who had heard strange sounds in the quiet of the night, weren't so sure. Sophie Lang, an investigative journalist from Berlin, arrived in Baden on a chilly autumn evening. She had grown up hearing about the town's mysterious cellar, and after years of research she believed she had pinpointed its possible location. The Schwartz Rose Inn, a crumbling building near the forest's edge, was her target. "Are you sure about staying there?" the cab driver asked as they pulled up to the inn. Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Why not? It's cheap and it's close to the forest." The cab driver didn't respond immediately, his knuckles tightening on the steering wheel. "Locals avoid that place," he finally muttered. "People say it's cursed." Sophie thanked him for his concern but dismissed the warning. She had a job to do. The inn was as eerie as she had imagined. The once grand facade was marred by ivy and grime. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew. The elderly innkeeper, Frau Meisner, greeted her with a nervous smile. "You're our only guest," Frau Meisner said as she handed Sophie an old-fashioned brass key. "Breakfast is at 8 and please," she hesitated, glancing down the dark hallway. "Stay in your room at night?" Sophie nodded, trying to mask her excitement. She had read accounts of strange occurrences at the Schwartz Rose, from phantom footsteps to unearthly moans. Staying here felt like a step closer to uncovering the cellar's secrets. That night, Sophie lay in bed listening intently. The old building creaked and groaned like a ship in a storm. Around midnight she heard it, a faint scratching sound coming from beneath her floorboards. Heart pounding, she grabbed her flashlight and followed the noise. The scratching led her to the basement, which Frau Meisner had specifically told her was off-limits. The door was locked, but the aged wood had rotted enough for Sophie to push it open. The basement was colder than the rest of the building, the air heavy with dampness. Her flashlight illuminated shelves of dusty wine bottles and crates covered in cobwebs. But in the far corner, partially hidden behind old furniture, she saw something that made her pulse quicken: a trapdoor. It was small and reinforced with iron hinges, the wood warped with age. Sophie hesitated, the warnings she'd dismissed earlier clawing at the edge of her mind. But curiosity won. She pried the door open, revealing a set of stone steps spiraling into darkness. The air grew colder as Sophie descended, the smell of earth and decay growing stronger. Her flashlight flickered, and for a terrifying moment she was plunged into darkness. She smacked it against her palm and the beam returned, revealing a cavernous room. The walls were lined with shelves, each cluttered with jars of preserved specimens, alchemical tools and handwritten ledgers. In the center of the room stood a large stone table, its surface stained with a substance she couldn't identify. Chains hung from the walls, and Sophie's breath caught when she saw deep gouges in the stone floor, as if something had struggled violently to escape. She moved to the table, her eyes scanning the inscriptions carved into it. They were symbols she didn't recognize, but the feeling they evoked was primal, wrong. As Sophie reached for one of the ledgers, she heard it, a low growl that seemed to come from all directions at once. She froze, her heart thundering in her chest. Slowly she turned, her flashlight trembling in her grip. A pair of yellow eyes stared back at her from the shadows. The creature emerged slowly, its form grotesque and unnatural. Its body was humanoid, but its limbs were elongated and bent at impossible angles. Its skin was ashen and stretched tight over its skeletal frame. Sophie backed away, but the creature moved with her, its movements jerky and inhuman. "This can't be real," she whispered, her voice shaking. The creature lunged. Sophie scrambled backward, her flashlight slipping from her grasp. In the chaos, her hand found a thick metal rod and she swung it wildly. The creature let out a deafening screech as the rod connected with its head, giving her a moment to escape. She fled up the stairs, her legs burning with exertion. She could hear the creature's claws scraping against the stone, its ragged breathing growing closer. Bursting through the basement door, she slammed it shut and shoved a heavy cabinet against it. For hours, Sophie sat in the corner of her room, clutching the metal rod and waiting for the sun to rise. When morning came, she confronted Frau Meisner. "What the hell is under this inn?" Sophie demanded, her voice hoarse. Frau Meisner paled but didn't deny knowing. "You went into the basement, didn't you? You knew about this?" Sophie shouted. The old woman sighed, tears welling in her eyes. "It's not the cellar you should fear, it's what the alchemist left behind. He tried to play God to create life. And when he failed, he abandoned it. But it didn't die." Sophie left Baden that day, but the experience never left her. She tried to write about it, to warn others, but every editor rejected her story, calling it implausible. She stopped pursuing it, haunted by nightmares of yellow eyes and scraping claws. Years later, Sophie heard of an inexplicable fire that consumed the Schwartz Rose Inn. The official report said no one was inside, but Sophie knew better. Something had been destroyed, or freed. And somewhere deep in the Black Forest, the legend of Der Verlorene Keller began anew.